I guess I was a dweeb. Kinda. Big, but not big enough to keep from getting picked on. I had blonde hair, kind of wild because I could never get it to look right. My eyes were... What color were my eyes? It's only been a few weeks, and already I've forgotten things about being human.
Well, apparently he hasn't forgotten how to lie, because that's the furthest thing from crazy, wild, blonde hair.
When I opened the book, I didn't know what I was gonna find. I saw the flashing light just coming down. Oh, what a beautiful sight. Then I was flying. Oh, super book. I was afraid to look. Super book. Oh, super book.
I won't usually bring up the book covers for this review, but this one is notable for two reasons, though neither of which will affect my final score. One, we get our first look at Tobias, apparently in the middle of doing the wave. In the books, as I implied, he was described as a wimpy little blonde kid, but this cover is showing us a brown-haired little punk. The story behind this is that Scholastics was contractually bound to use this model for the cover, but he had dyed his hair shortly before. Not really sure why that's a problem. This isn't a photo so much as a photo recreation, so I can't imagine it'd be that hard to yellow up his hair that much. They changed the model 4 years later, but by that point, this is how people saw Tobias in their heads. Secondly, I have never, ever come across a copy of this book without the cover being torn, and in the exact same place every time. Both copies I've owned have been torn there. All copies owned by friends were torn there. All copies I saw at libraries and bookstores were torn there. It's like Scholastic specifically made it to be the one book in the world you can't get in mint condition. Damn you, Scholastic! I don't collect these for financial value, but damn you! So, the encounter. We open with Tobias circling the city in prep for his latest mission. And after taking on such foes as elderly security guards, drunk teenagers, and cats in trees, the Animorphs are finally taking on a serious challenge. A used car salesman. Tobias is pissed because Dealing Dan Hawke keeps a female red-tailed hawk in a cage for his commercials, and all birds should fly free and whatnot. Dealing Dan is filming a live commercial for a reason, so Tobias takes this opportunity to do weird, unlike Hawke things in front of thousands of people. And Rachel's there too, as an elephant. And not even Dealing Dan's insane prices can stop the chaos. They free the female hawk and escape. Naturally, the rest of the Animorphs chew them out. But what do you expect? Tobias is a clinical nutcase, and this is the third improper use of Rachel's powers in the last 2 books. Baby, she's on a roll. Anyway, with one used car salesman down, we get to the story proper. Tobias goes for a joy fly that evening, and while high in the city, senses a mass that he can't see. Tobias searches for it again the next day, and witnesses a flock of geese fly directly into an invisible wall. Tobias brings his findings to the rest of the Animorphs, and they deduce that there must be a Yeerk ship with a cloaking device over the city. The ship was heading towards the mountains, but too slow to pass over them, so they must be doing something in the mountains. After some arguing if they should do anything at all, after all, they've had 2 serious close calls, and you can't be so lucky to find bulldozers with keys in the ignition all the time, they decide to at least sneak into the mountains and check things out. However, a healthy bird-watching population hangs out in the mountains, and they can't have 4 different bird species that don't socialize hanging out with each other. So instead, Jake, Rachel, Marco, and Cassie morph wolves. Marco gets all indignant because he has to morph a female wolf. You better enjoy it while you can, Marco. It's the most pussy you're going to get in this series. The Animorphs make their way through the woods with a few wolf hijinks. Trees are peed on, they howl at nothing, and they curse Lon Chaney Jr. They get to the lake to find a small army of Yeerk-controlled Park Service Rangers and some Hork-Bajir controllers.
Yes, no one will suspect us in our government-issued uniforms. They'll probably suspect us for standing next to 7-foot lizard people, but our uniforms are just dandy.
Finally, the ship shows up and uncloaks. It's huge, and looks like a metallic oceanic ray, obviously here to stop Mecha Steve Irwin. There are large jet engine-like devices under the wings, and long tubes that come out of the bottom and start sucking up water. Marco comes to the conclusion that the ship is basically a giant truck, delivering water and air to whatever kind of mothership the Yeerks have over Earth. Of course, we'll learn in later books that the Yeerks can more or less punch holes into the 8th dimension, so the simple act of creating air and water would seem like a no-brainer for them. And really, if you're that stuck up for air, why not put some plants on your ships? Some nice begonias would go great in your enslavement camps. The Animorphs, low on time, start to retreat into the forest. Tobias sees the female Hawke he freed earlier, and has a strong natural urge to be with her, aka Hawke boner. Tobias has a surge of powerful emotions, but manages to get a hold of himself. As he's heading for his friends, he spies a clock inside a park ranger car, and if it's right, the rest of the Animorphs are already past their 2 hours. Tobias hauls ass and tells them to try and demorph now, and thankfully the clock does turn out to be wrong. The Animorphs demorph, but not without some trouble, and everyone is shaken by the close call. But none more shaken as Tobias, and we enter the real meat of this book. As I implied in my last review, Tobias should have been the obvious choice of narrator for the second book, as he's dealing with the most internal conflict right now. And the next 6 or so chapters are basically devoted to Tobias' inner monologue as he fights against his animal instincts, tries to cope with the fact that he's now more or less useless in this war, realizes what he's lost when he gave up being human, and basically wallows in self-pity. It never gets annoying, though. It's all very realistic and well written, and never enters pretentious emo territory. All these overwhelming feelings finally spill over when, while daydreaming about getting into open-air concerts and drive-in movies for free, he loses his self-control, and his animal instincts make him kill and eat a rat. At this point, he's been living off food Jake gave him, but with this kill, Tobias feels as though all human connection in his life is now severed, and he decides to kill himself. He flies into the mall where Rachel just happens to be having a gymnastics presentation. He bellows and cries and then makes a suicide run towards a skylight. But Marco, who's also there, materializes a baseball out of nowhere and breaks the skylight in time for Tobias to pass harmlessly to the outside. Tobias flies to the forest and gives in completely to the animal instincts, living like a natural hawk. The world around him becomes that of predator and prey. Once again, he runs into the female Hawke and starts having strange feelings towards her, and I'm tempted to use a certain Nine Inch Nails song as my closer. And I'm more mature than that. Tobias then discovers a human being chased by a Hork-Bajir. At first, Tobias just sees it as another day in the wacky world of pred and prey, but his human emotions ever so slowly start to bubble up, and starts to recognize human values again. He pulls himself out of his Hawk bender and attacks the Hork-Bajir, leading the human to safety. That night, he goes to Rachel's house and tells her the whole thing. Rachel tries to comfort him and tell him that killing for food is natural, and what the Yeerks do is just plain evil. Of course, it's hardly that simple, but I'll get into that in another review. So after getting some counseling from the girl who turns into elephants and has a serious entitlement complex, Tobias regroups with the rest of the Animorphs, and they plot. The plan? Morph fish, get sucked into the ship, and somehow cause it to uncloak over the city, a display which the Yeerks couldn't possibly cover up.